Sarah Martinez limped through the military base cafeteria, her crutches clicking against the polished floor. The 22-year-old soldier tried to ignore the whispers that followed her wherever she went. 3 months had passed since the explosion. That changed everything, yet the stares never stopped. She found an empty table in the corner and carefully lowered herself into the chair. Her left leg, wrapped in bandages beneath her uniform pants, throbbed with each movement. The doctors said she was lucky to still have it, but some days Sarah wondered if lucky was the right word. Well, look what we have here," came a mocking voice from behind her. Sarah's stomach dropped as she recognized the speaker. Private Jake Morrison, 24 years old and known throughout the base for his cruel sense of humor, approached with his usual group of followers. Jake pulled out a chair and sat down, uninvited, his friends gathering around the table. "Still playing Soldier Martinez? I heard they're thinking of giving you a desk job. Maybe filing papers is more your speed now." Sarah kept her eyes on her tray, focusing on cutting her chicken. She had learned that responding only made things worse. The other soldiers at nearby tables pretended not to notice, but she could feel their attention. "I mean, what good is a soldier who can't even walk properly?" Jake continued, his voice growing louder. "You're just taking up space now, resources that could go to real soldiers." One of Jake's friends, Private Collins, laughed. Maybe they should give her a wheelchair, then she could at least move faster. Sarah's hands tightened on her utensils. The anger burned in her chest, but she had to stay calm. Getting into fights would only prove their point. She was already under scrutiny from the higher-ups, who questioned whether she belonged in the military anymore. "Come on, Martinez," Jake pressed. "Don't you have anything to say? Or did the explosion damage more than just your leg?" This time Sarah looked up. Her dark brown eyes met Jake's pale blue ones with steady determination. "I have nothing to say to you, Morrison." Jake's smile widened. He enjoyed getting reactions. "Oh, she speaks, tell me. How does it feel knowing you'll never see real action again? All those years of training, and for what? To limp around a base doing paperwork?" The cafeteria had grown quieter. More soldiers were watching now, though none intervened. Sarah felt the familiar shame creep up her neck. Part of her wondered if Jake was right. Maybe she was just fooling herself, clinging to a dream that died in that desert explosion. "I bet you wish you'd never enlisted," Jake continued. "Could have stayed home, found some nice civilian job. But no, you had to play hero. Look where it got you." Sarah's jaw clenched. She thought about that day constantly. The convoy had been routine, just a supply run to a forward operating base. She was the communications specialist responsible for maintaining contact with headquarters. Everything had been going smoothly until the roadside bomb changed everything in an instant. She remembered the flash of light, the deafening sound, and then waking up in a field hospital with half her unit gone. The doctors said a piece of shrapnel had missed her main artery by inches. Her squad leader, Sergeant Davis, hadn't been as fortunate. "You know what I heard?" Jake leaned closer, lowering his voice to a mock whisper that was still loud enough for others to hear. "I heard you froze up. When the shooting started after the explosion, you just sat there crying while real soldiers did the fighting." That wasn't true, but Sarah couldn't explain what really happened without revealing classified information. The truth was far different from Jake's cruel version, but she was bound by oaths that meant more to her than defending herself against a bully. "That's enough, Morrison." The voice came from Corporal Williams, a respected soldier who rarely involved himself in drama. He stood behind Jake with his arms crossed. "Leave her alone." Jake looked annoyed at the interruption. "Just having a conversation, Williams. No harm in that." "Find somewhere else to have it," Williams said firmly. His tone carried the authority of someone who had seen real combat and earned his stripes the hard way. For a moment, Jake looked like he might argue, but Williams had friends throughout the base, and Jake wasn't stupid enough to make enemies of them. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This isn't over, Martinez," he said with a smirk. "Everyone knows what you really are now, a broken soldier who should have stayed home." As Jake and his friends walked away, William sat down across from Sarah. His weathered face showed concern. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, though her hands were still shaking slightly. "Thanks for stepping in." "Morrison's an idiot," Williams said bluntly. "Don't let him get to you. He's never seen real action, never been tested. He has no idea what you've been through." But Williams didn't know the whole truth either. No one on the base did, except for a select few in the command structure. Sarah's injury was only part of the story. What happened during and after the explosion was classified at the highest levels, and she couldn't share it with anyone. The isolation was almost worse than the physical pain. She carried secrets that weighed on her shoulders like invisible armor. Sometimes she wanted to scream the truth, to tell everyone what she had really done that day. But her training and her oath kept her silent. As she finished her meal alone, Sarah's mind drifted to the letter she had received that morning. It was from her mother asking when she might come home for a visit. Her family didn't understand why she was staying in the military. They thought she was being stubborn, refusing to accept her limitations. But Sarah knew something they didn't. Her injury was healing faster than anyone expected. The doctors were amazed by her progress, though they attributed it to her young age and previous fitness level. What they didn't know was that Sarah was pushing herself beyond normal limits. During her private rehabilitation sessions, she had a goal that drove her forward every day. In 6 weeks, there would be a ceremony on the base. A very important ceremony that would determine her future in ways that Jake Morrison and others like him couldn't imagine. Sarah just had to survive until then, keeping her secrets safe and her true abilities hidden. As she gathered her things to leave, Sarah caught sight of Jake across the cafeteria. He was still talking to his friends, probably spinning more stories about her. Let him, she thought. Soon enough, everything would change. The question was whether she would be ready when that moment came. The next morning brought another round of physical therapy in the base medical facility. Sarah gritted her teeth as the therapist, Lieutenant Johnson, guided her through exercises that would have been simple before the explosion. Now each movement was a battle against pain and the limitations of her healing body. "You're pushing too hard again, Martinez," Johnson said, watching as sweat beaded on Sarah's forehead. "Recovery takes time. You can't rush it." Sarah completed another repetition of the leg extension exercise, her muscles screaming in protest. "I need to get back to full duty, sir. Sitting around isn't helping anyone." Johnson made notes on his clipboard, frowning. "Your progress is remarkable, but you're still months away from being cleared for active duty. If you keep pushing like this, you'll set yourself back." What Johnson didn't know was that Sarah had her own private training regimen. Every night after lights out, she snuck out to an abandoned storage building on the far edge of the base. There, surrounded by old equipment and dusty crates, she pushed her body beyond what the doctors thought possible. The unauthorized training was dangerous, but Sarah had reasons that went beyond personal pride. The letter in her footlocker, marked with security classifications that most soldiers would never see, contained instructions that could change everything. She just had to be ready. That evening, as Sarah made her way to the storage building, she noticed she wasn't alone. Corporal Williams emerged from the shadows, causing her to freeze in place. "Easy, Martinez," he said quietly. "I'm not here to bust you." Sarah's heart pounded. Being caught outside the barracks after hours could result in disciplinary action. "I was just training," Williams finished. "I know. I've been watching you for weeks." The older soldier stepped closer, and Sarah could see the serious expression on his face. Williams had 20 years of service, 3 tours of combat, and a reputation for being one of the most observant people on the base. "Sir, I can explain," Sarah started. Williams held up a hand. "No explanations needed, but I am curious about something. What's driving you so hard? And don't tell me it's just about proving Morrison wrong." Sarah hesitated. She couldn't reveal the classified nature of her situation. But Williams deserved some kind of answer. He had been kind to her when others hadn't. "I made promises," she said finally, "to people who aren't around to see me keep them." Williams nodded slowly. He understood about promises made to fallen comrades. The men who didn't make it back from that convoy. "Yes, sir." They wouldn't want you to destroy yourself trying to honor them, Williams said gently. Sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to take care of the living, starting with yourself. But Sarah knew Williams was wrong about one thing. Her fallen squad members weren't the only ones she had made promises to. There was someone else, someone whose identity was so classified that acknowledging their existence could end careers and compromise ongoing operations. After Williams left, Sarah continued with her training. She worked through pain that would have stopped most people, driven by the knowledge that time was running short. The ceremony was approaching, and with it, the moment that would determine whether her sacrifices had been worth it. The next few days passed in a blur of routine duties, physical therapy, and secret training sessions. Sarah's performance in official evaluations remained carefully controlled. She couldn't appear to be healing too quickly without raising questions, so she maintained the illusion of steady but normal progress. Jake Morrison continued his harassment campaign, seeming to take pleasure in finding new ways to humiliate her. During a weapons maintenance session, he made loud comments about how someone with shaky hands probably shouldn't be trusted with firearms. During formation, he whispered jokes about her limp to the soldiers around him. Sarah endured it all with outward calm, but inside her determination grew stronger. She thought about the night of the explosion, about the voice that had spoken to her through the radio static as she lay trapped in the wreckage of her vehicle. "Stay alive, Phoenix," the voice had said, using a code name that officially didn't exist. "Your country needs you more than you know." Phoenix. Even thinking the name sent chills through Sarah's body. It was an identity that connected her to operations and people that existed in the shadows of the military structure. An identity that Jake Morrison and others like him couldn't even imagine. During the days that followed, subtle changes began appearing around the base. New personnel arrived without fanfare, their uniforms lacking the usual identifying patches. Security protocols were quietly updated. The command staff held more closed-door meetings. Sarah recognized the signs. Something big was approaching, and it was connected to the ceremony that had been consuming her thoughts. She increased the intensity of her secret training, pushing her body to limits that amazed even her. One night, as she completed a particularly grueling session in the storage building, Sarah found an envelope slipped under a crate near the door. Her name was written on it in handwriting she didn't recognize, but inside was a message that made her blood run cold. "The Phoenix rises at dawn. Be ready." The message was unsigned, but Sarah knew it was connected to her classified assignment. Dawn was still hours away, but she understood the meaning. The waiting was almost over. She returned to her barracks and lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Around her, other soldiers slept peacefully, unaware that their world was about to change. Sarah thought about her family back home, about the life she might have had if she had chosen a different path, but there was no point in regrets now. She had made her choices and they had led her to this moment. Whatever came next, she would face it as she had faced everything else, with courage, determination, and the knowledge that some things were worth fighting for, even if the world never knew about the fight. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the barracks windows, Sarah heard the sound of vehicles approaching the building. Heavy vehicles, moving with military precision. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, preparing for the moment that would change everything. The door to the barracks opened, and a figure in dress uniform stepped inside. Sarah recognized the insignia immediately. Someone from high command, higher than anyone on this base had authority to question. "Martinez," the figure called quietly. "Time to go." Sarah rose from her bunk, ignoring the curious looks from soldiers who were beginning to wake up. She had been preparing for this moment for months, but now that it was here, she felt a mixture of fear and excitement that threatened to overwhelm her. As she followed the officer outside, Sarah caught a glimpse of Jake Morrison watching from another barracks window. His expression was one of confusion and concern. For the first time since she had known him, he looked uncertain. Soon, Sarah thought, everything would make sense. The injuries, the harassment, the secret training, the mysterious messages. It was all leading to this moment. the ceremony that would reveal who she really was and what she was truly capable of. The black sedan moved through the pre-dawn darkness with quiet efficiency. Sarah sat in the back seat beside the officer who had come to collect her, watching familiar landmarks disappear behind them. They weren't heading to any part of the base she recognized. "Where are we going, sir?" she asked, though she suspected she wouldn't get a straight answer. Colonel Richards, whose nameplate was the only identification he wore, glanced at her with sharp gray eyes. "Somewhere you can stop pretending to be weaker than you are." Sarah's breath caught. So they knew about her secret training, her accelerated recovery, all of it. The question was how long they had known and what they planned to do about it. The vehicle turned onto a road that led deep into the wooded hills surrounding the base. Sarah had never been in this direction before, though she had sometimes wondered what lay beyond the restricted access signs. Now she was about to find out. After 20 minutes of driving, they approached a checkpoint that looked more like something from a spy movie than a military installation. Guards in unmarked uniforms checked their credentials with equipment Sarah didn't recognize. Beyond the checkpoint, a complex of buildings nestled among the trees, practically invisible from any distance. "Welcome to your real assignment, Martinez," Colonel Richards said as they pulled up to the main building. "Or should I say, welcome home, Phoenix." The use of her code name sent electricity through Sarah's system. For months, she had wondered if that voice in the radio static had been real, or a hallucination brought on by trauma and painkillers. Now she had her answer. Inside the facility, Sarah found herself in a world she hadn't known existed. The corridors bustled with activity, but these weren't regular military personnel. These people moved with the fluid precision of highly trained specialists. Their uniforms bore no standard military insignia, only small patches with symbols Sarah didn't recognize. Colonel Richards led her to a briefing room where several people waited around a conference table. At the head of the table sat a woman whose presence commanded immediate attention. She appeared to be in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Phoenix," the woman said, and Sarah knew immediately that this was the voice from the radio. "Please sit down." Sarah took the indicated chair, her mind racing. The woman's uniform bore the insignia of a general, but there was something about her that suggested she operated beyond normal military hierarchy. "I'm General Patricia Stone," the woman continued. "And you, my dear, are the reason we've all been waiting very patiently for the past 3 months." "Ma'am, I don't understand," Sarah said, though parts of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture in her mind. General Stone smiled, and for the first time since the explosion, Sarah saw someone look at her with something other than pity or contempt. "The convoy attack that injured you wasn't random, Phoenix. It was specifically designed to target you, based on intelligence we had gathered about a new terrorist cell operating in the region." Sarah felt the world shift beneath her. "Target me? But I was just a communications specialist." "On paper, yes," General Stone agreed. "In reality, you were the key component of an operation 3 years in the making. Your role as communications specialist was perfect cover for someone with your particular set of skills." Colonel Richards activated a wall display that showed satellite imagery of the desert where Sarah's convoy had been attacked. The terrorists knew that Phoenix, you would be on that convoy. They wanted to eliminate you before you could complete your real mission. "Which was?" Sarah asked, though she was starting to suspect the answer. "To infiltrate their organization," General Stone said simply. "Your injury, your apparent vulnerability, your return to this base, it was all part of the plan. Or rather, it became part of the plan when we realized the opportunity your situation presented." Sarah stared at the satellite images, remembering that terrible day from a completely different perspective. The voice on the radio, "When I was trapped in the wreckage, that was you." "Yes," General Stone confirmed. "We had been monitoring communications, hoping to extract you quickly. When the attack happened, we had to adapt. Your injury became our asset." "I don't understand how," Sarah said. Colonel Richards leaned forward. "The terrorists believe they succeeded in crippling you. Intelligence reports indicate they think Phoenix, the operative they feared, is no longer a threat. They've become careless, more open in their communications and movements. Which gives us the opportunity we've been waiting for, General Stone added, but only if Phoenix is ready to complete her mission. Sarah felt a mix of emotions she couldn't fully identify. Relief that her suffering had purpose, anger that she hadn't been told the truth, and underneath it all, a growing excitement about what came next. The harassment from Morrison and others like him, she said. Did you know about that? General Stone's expression darkened. We were aware. It was unfortunate but served our purposes. Your apparent weakness needed to be convincing to anyone who might be reporting back to our targets. Reporting back? Sarah's blood ran cold. You think there are enemy agents on the base? We know there are. Colonel Richards said grimly. Morrison isn't one of them, but some of the people watching his harassment of you definitely are. Your performance as a broken soldier has been Academy Award worthy. The pieces clicked into place in Sarah's mind. The mysterious personnel arriving. At the base, the increased security, the careful monitoring of her progress. It had all been preparation for this moment. What exactly is my mission? Sarah asked. General Stone stood and walked to another wall display. This one showed photographs of several men in Middle Eastern dress, along with documents in Arabic and what looked like surveillance photos taken from a great distance. These are the leaders of the cell that attacked your convoy, she said. They call themselves the Desert Shadows, and they've been responsible for attacks on American interests throughout the region. Intelligence suggests they're planning something much bigger than anything they've attempted before. And you want me to infiltrate them? We want you to destroy them, General Stone said bluntly. From the inside, completely, so they can never threaten American lives again. Sarah studied the photographs. These were the faces of the people who had killed her squad mates, who had tried to kill her. The anger that had been simmering inside her for months began to crystallize into something sharper and more focused. How? She asked. Colonel Richards smiled for the first time since she had met him. That's where your recovery becomes very important. In 2 days, you're going to have an accident during physical therapy, a setback that requires you to be transferred to a specialized rehabilitation facility. Except the facility will actually be a staging ground for your insertion into Desert Shadow territory, General Stone continued. They'll be expecting a broken American soldier seeking medical treatment. What they'll get is Phoenix, fully operational and very, very angry. Sarah thought about Jake Morrison, about the months of humiliation and doubt she had endured. All of it had been building toward this moment. The question was whether she was ready to become the weapon her country needed her to be. When do we start? She asked. General Stone's smile was razor sharp. We already have, my dear. We already have. Outside the briefing room, preparations were already underway for an operation that would either end the Desert Shadows forever or cost Phoenix everything she had left to give. But for the first time in months, Sarah felt like herself again. The real Phoenix was about to spread her wings. The staged accident happened exactly as planned. During her regular physical therapy session, Sarah collapsed during a routine exercise, crying out as her leg gave way beneath her. Lieutenant Johnson rushed to her side, his face full of genuine concern as he examined what appeared to be a serious setback. We need to get her to medical immediately, Johnson said to the orderlies, who quickly responded. This could be a torn ligament or worse. What Johnson didn't know was that Sarah had spent hours practicing the fall, learning how to make it look convincing without actually injuring herself further. The blood on her bandages was fake, applied moments before the session began. Even her cries of pain were carefully rehearsed. Within hours, the official story spread throughout the base. Private Martinez had suffered a major setback and would need to be transferred to a specialized facility for extended treatment. The paperwork was already being processed, and she would be moved within the week. Jake Morrison was among the first to hear the news. Sarah saw him outside the medical building as she was wheeled to an ambulance, her leg heavily bandaged and her face pale with what appeared to be pain medication. Guess that's it for playing soldier, Jake called out to his friends. Though his voice lacked its usual cruel edge, Something about seeing Sarah so genuinely helpless seemed to affect even him. Sarah played her part perfectly, looking defeated and broken as the ambulance drove away. Inside, though, her mind was sharp and focused. General Stone had provided her with detailed briefings about what came next, and every detail mattered. The rehabilitation facility was actually a training compound hidden in the mountains 200 miles from the base. From the outside, it looked like a medical center, complete with wheelchair ramps and therapy equipment visible through the windows. Inside, it was something entirely different. "Welcome to Phoenix School," Colonel Richards said as they passed, through security checkpoints that rivaled anything at government facilities. "This is where we turn good soldiers into legends." The next 6 weeks were unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her military training. Her instructors were people whose names would never appear in any official records, who had spent their careers in the shadows fighting wars the public would never know about. She learned advanced combat techniques that went far beyond standard military training. Hand-to-hand combat that could disable opponents twice her size. Weapons handling with equipment that didn't appear in any military manual. Most importantly, she learned how to think like her enemies, to become someone they would trust long enough to get close. "The Desert Shadows aren't just terrorists," her instructor, a woman known only as Control, explained during one session. "They're survivors. They've lived through decades of conflict by being smart, paranoid, and utterly ruthless. To beat them, you have to be smarter, more paranoid, and even more ruthless." Sarah's cover story was carefully crafted. She would be Dr. Sarah Martinez, a former military medic seeking to work with humanitarian organizations in the Middle East. Her injury would be real enough to explain any limitations, but not severe enough to prevent her from being useful. The Desert Shadows had connections with several medical charities that operated in refugee camps, and these would be her way in. The training wasn't just physical. Sarah spent hours learning Arabic dialects, studying Islamic customs and traditions, and memorizing the personal histories of her targets. She learned to think in character, to become someone who would never be suspected of being an American operative. "The key to deep cover," Control explained, "is that you don't pretend to be someone else. You become someone else. Sarah Martinez, the soldier, has to disappear completely. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the humanitarian, has to be the only person who exists." During this time, reports filtered back from the base about how her absence was being received. Jake Morrison had apparently grown quiet, no longer making jokes about her situation. Corporal Williams had asked several people about her condition. Even Lieutenant Johnson seemed genuinely worried about her progress. "It's strange," Sarah mentioned to Colonel Richards during one of their check-in sessions. "I spent so much time hating Morrison for what he said, but now that he thinks I'm really broken, he seems almost sorry." "People often don't realize the impact of their cruelty until they see real consequences," Richards replied. "Morrison is a bully, but he's not evil. There's a difference." As the training progressed, Sarah felt herself changing in ways that went beyond the physical improvements. The months of harassment and doubt were being transformed into something harder and more focused. She was becoming the weapon General Stone had envisioned. The final phase of training involved a simulation that was as close to real combat as possible, without actual bullets. Sarah had to infiltrate a mock terrorist compound, gather intelligence, and eliminate specific targets without being detected. She failed the first 3 attempts, but by the 4th, she moved through the exercise with deadly precision. "You're ready," Control said afterward, and Sarah felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with her old life as a regular soldier. The insertion plan was elegant in its simplicity. Dr. Sarah Martinez would arrive in Jordan as part of a legitimate medical mission. From there, she would make contact with the charity organizations that served as fronts for Desert Shadow operations. Her reputation as a dedicated humanitarian with medical skills would make her valuable to them, and her apparent physical limitations would make her seem harmless. The night before her departure, General Stone came to see her one final time. "Once you're in position," the general said, "you'll be completely on your own. We can't extract you if things go wrong. We can't even acknowledge that you exist." Sarah nodded. She had understood the risks from the beginning. "What about afterward?" "Assuming I succeed, Phoenix will disappear," General Stone said simply. She'll have completed her mission and no longer be needed. What happens to Sarah Martinez after that will be up to you. As Sarah lay in her bunk that night, she thought about the people she was leaving behind. Her family, who thought she was still recovering in a medical facility. The soldiers at the base who believed she was broken and helpless. Jake Morrison, who would probably never know that his cruelty had helped prepare her for the most important mission of her life. In the morning, she would board a plane that would take her halfway around the world to face enemies who wanted nothing more than to kill Americans like her. She would be alone, operating under a false identity in hostile territory, with only her training and her wits to keep her alive. But for the first time in months, Sarah Martinez felt truly alive. Phoenix was ready to hunt, and the desert shadows had no idea what was coming for them. The transformation was complete. The broken soldier who had limped through the base cafeteria while enduring harassment was gone. In her place was someone far more dangerous, someone who carried the hopes and vengeance of every American who had died at the hands of terrorists. Tomorrow, the real mission would begin. Tonight, Phoenix spread her wings and prepared to soar into the darkness where legends were born and enemies learned to fear the shadows that hunted them. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the dusty courtyard of a refugee camp outside Amman, Jordan, her medical bag slung over her shoulder and sweat beading on her forehead despite the early morning hour. To anyone watching, she was exactly what she appeared to be, Dr. Sarah Martinez, a dedicated American humanitarian working to heal the wounds of war. The reality was far more complex. In the months since her insertion, Sarah had successfully infiltrated 3 different charity organizations with connections to the desert shadows. She had treated wounded fighters, gained the trust of their families, and slowly worked her way into the inner circle of the terrorist network. Her apparent physical limitations had been crucial to her success. The slight limp she maintained, the careful way she moved, the occasional wince when she thought no one was looking. All of it convinced her targets that she was exactly what she seemed. A broken former soldier trying to find meaning through medical work. "Dr. Martinez," called a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Amara, a young woman who served as her translator and had become something close to a friend over the past months. "There are men here to see you." Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression calm. "What kind of men?" "The kind who ask many questions," Amara said quietly. "They want to know about your work, your background. They seem interested." This was the moment Sarah had been preparing for. After months of careful positioning, the desert shadows were finally ready to make direct contact. Her reputation as a skilled and discreet doctor who asked no questions had reached the right ears. The men waiting in her clinic were exactly what she expected. Middle-aged, weathered by years of conflict, with eyes that missed nothing and hands that never strayed far from concealed weapons. Sarah recognized the type immediately. Mid-level operatives sent to evaluate potential assets. "Dr. Martinez," the leader said in accented English. "I am Hassan. We have heard good things about your work here." Sarah maintained her cover perfectly. "I try to help where I can. Medical care shouldn't be political." Hassan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed, we have people who could benefit from such care. People who cannot always visit regular hospitals." "I understand," Sarah said, carefully. "Distance and complications can make medical care difficult to access." Over the next hour, the men questioned her extensively about her background, her motivations, and her discretion. Sarah's carefully constructed cover story held up perfectly. Yes, she had been injured in military service. Yes, she had become disillusioned with American foreign policy. Yes, she was committed to helping all people, regardless of politics. What they didn't see was the tiny recording device hidden in her medical equipment, capturing their faces and voices for intelligence analysis back home. What they couldn't detect were the weapons concealed throughout her clinic, positioned exactly where she could reach them if the situation turned violent. "There is a facility," Hassan said finally. "In the mountains. We have fighters there who need medical attention, but they cannot travel. Would you be willing to help them?" Sarah pretended to consider the offer carefully. It would depend on the situation. I don't want to be involved in anything violent. There would be no violence, Hassan assured her. Just healing. You would be well compensated, and you would be helping people who have nowhere else to turn. 3 days later, Sarah found herself in the back of a dusty pickup truck, traveling mountain roads that seemed designed to discourage visitors. Her medical supplies were in the truck bed beside her, along with enough personal belongings to suggest she planned to stay for several weeks. The Desert Shadow compound was hidden in a valley that couldn't be seen from any main road. From the air, it would look like just another collection of rural buildings. On the ground, Sarah could see the careful defensive positions, the sophisticated communications equipment, and the signs of a well-organized military operation. "Welcome to our home," Hassan said as they passed through what looked like a simple farm gate but was actually a carefully disguised checkpoint. "We hope you will be comfortable here." Sarah was given quarters in a small building that had clearly been prepared for her visit. It was simple but clean, with a bed, desk, and small bathroom. More importantly, from an operational standpoint, it was positioned where she could observe most of the compound's activities. Over the following weeks, Sarah established herself as an invaluable asset to the organization. She treated wounded fighters with skill and discretion, never asking how they had been injured. She provided medical training to other members of the group. Most importantly, she became trusted enough to move freely throughout the compound. What the Desert Shadows didn't know was that Dr. Sarah Martinez was mapping every building, recording every conversation she could overhear, and identifying every leader in the organization. The innocent medical supplies in her clinic contained sophisticated surveillance equipment that transmitted data to satellites passing overhead. The leader of the Desert Shadows was a man named Omar al-Rashid. Though Sarah knew from her briefings that this was an assumed name, he was intelligent, charismatic, and absolutely dedicated to destroying American interests in the region. He also suffered from a chronic condition that required regular medication that Sarah was now responsible for providing. "You have been a blessing to our cause, Doctor," Omar said during one of their sessions. "Your people, the Americans, they see us as monsters. But you understand that we are simply defending our homeland." Sarah nodded sympathetically while carefully adjusting his medication dosage. "Everyone deserves medical care," she said. "Politics shouldn't enter into healing." What Omar didn't know was that each dose of his medication now contained a carefully calibrated additive that would remain harmless until activated by a specific radio frequency. When the time came, Sarah would have the ability to incapacitate him without anyone suspecting medical sabotage. But Omar's medical treatment was just one part of a larger plan. Through careful observation and strategic conversations, Sarah had identified the location of the group's main weapons cache, their communications center, and most importantly, the details of their planned major attack on American targets. The attack was scheduled to happen in less than 2 weeks. Multiple suicide bombers would strike American embassies and military installations across 3 countries simultaneously. The coordination required was staggering, and the potential casualties would be enormous. Sarah transmitted this intelligence during her regular medical supply runs to the nearby town. The information would reach General Stone within hours, but the decision about how to proceed would ultimately be Sarah's. She was the only asset in position to prevent the attacks, but doing so would expose her identity and put her life in extreme danger. The weight of responsibility was crushing. Every night, as she lay in her simple bed listening to the sounds of the compound around her, Sarah thought about the innocent people who would die if she failed. She thought about her fallen squad mates, about the promise she had made in that radio transmission months ago, about the soldier she had been and the weapon she had become. On the night before the planned attack, Omar summoned her to his private quarters. Sarah arrived with his medication and her usual calm demeanor, but inside, every instinct screamed danger. "Doctor," Omar said, his eyes studying her face carefully, "I have something to tell you. Tomorrow we strike a blow for freedom that will be remembered for generations." Sarah maintained her expression of polite interest. "I hope your cause succeeds. Omar, you and your people deserve peace. Peace will only come when the Americans leave our lands forever, Omar replied. And tomorrow we will give them reasons to do exactly that. As he spoke, Sarah noticed subtle changes in the room. Additional guards outside the door. Weapons positioned more strategically. The careful way Omar watched her reactions to his words. They knew. Somehow, despite all her precautions and careful performance, the Desert Shadows had discovered her true identity. The question was how much they knew and whether she could still complete her mission. Tell me, Doctor, Omar continued conversationally. What does the name Phoenix mean to you? Sarah felt her blood turn to ice, but years of training kept her face neutral. It's a mythical bird, she said calmly. One that rises from ashes to live again. Omar smiled, and Sarah saw death in his expression. Indeed, how poetic, and how appropriate, since we know exactly who you are, Phoenix. The moment of truth had arrived. Sarah calculated distances to weapons, exit routes, and the number of enemies between her and freedom. The odds were terrible, but she had faced worse situations during her training. I think there's been some misunderstanding, she said, taking a small step closer to the medical bag that contained her emergency weapons. No misunderstanding, Omar said firmly. We have known for weeks that the injured American soldier who became Dr. Sarah Martinez was actually a spy sent to destroy us. What we didn't know was how much damage you had already done. Sarah realized that her months of careful work had been compromised, but she also understood something else. If they had known for weeks but hadn't acted until now, it meant they weren't certain about the extent of her mission. They were fishing for information, trying to get her to reveal what she knew. You're mistaken, she said firmly. I'm exactly who I claim to be, a doctor trying to help people. Omar's laugh was cold and humorless. Phoenix, we know about your training facility in the mountains. We know about General Stone and Colonel Richards. We know about your real mission here. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. If they knew about the training facility, it meant their intelligence network was far more sophisticated than anyone had realized. It also meant that other operations, other agents might be compromised. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah felt something else rising inside her. The anger and determination that had sustained her through months of harassment and pain. The commitment to her fallen comrades and her country. The knowledge that sometimes one person had to stand against the darkness, regardless of the cost. You're right, she said quietly, and Omar's expression shifted to one of triumph. I am Phoenix, and now you will tell us everything about American operations in this region, or you will die very slowly and very painfully. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since entering the compound, she let her true self show through the mask of Dr. Martinez. Omar, she said softly, you have no idea what you've just awakened. The battle for the Desert Shadow compound was about to begin, and Phoenix was finally free to spread her wings. The transformation was instantaneous. The mild-mannered doctor who had spent months treating wounded terrorists disappeared, replaced by the highly trained operative who had been waiting beneath the surface. Sarah's posture changed. Her movements became fluid and predatory, and her eyes took on the cold focus of someone who had killed before, and would kill again. Omar stepped backward instinctively, suddenly realizing that he had made a terrible mistake. The woman he thought was a helpless prisoner was actually the most dangerous person in the room. Guards! Omar shouted, but Sarah was already moving. Her medical bag contained more than just surveillance equipment. Hidden among the bandages and medicine were weapons that had been carefully designed to pass inspection. A scalpel that was actually a throwing knife. Syringes filled with fast-acting paralytic agents. A stethoscope that could be used as a garrote. The first guard through the door never knew what hit him. Sarah's throwing knife caught him in the throat before he could raise his weapon. The second guard managed to get his rifle halfway to his shoulder, before the syringe found his neck and dropped him like a stone. Omar was fumbling for his sidearm when Sarah's stethoscope whipped around his neck and cut off his air supply. Within seconds, the most feared terrorist leader in the region was unconscious on the floor of his own quarters. But Sarah's real objective wasn't killing. It was stopping the planned attack. She had exactly 13 hours before suicide bombers would strike American targets across 3 countries. That meant she had to disable the Desert Shadows communications network, destroy their weapons cache, and eliminate their operational capability entirely. She dragged Omar's unconscious form to his desk and activated his computer using biometric scanners she had observed him use during previous visits. Her months of careful observation paid off as she accessed the complete details of the planned attack, including the names and locations of all the suicide bombers. Using Omar's own communication system, Sarah transmitted an abort signal to the Yadi bomber teams using code words she had learned during her time in the compound. 3 teams acknowledged and began their extraction procedures. 2 teams didn't respond, which meant she would have to rely on the intelligence agencies to intercept them. Next, she needed to destroy the compound's ability to coordinate future attacks. Sarah had memorized the location of every important facility during her time there, and now she moved through the complex with deadly efficiency. The communications center was her first target. The guards there were expecting Dr. Martinez to be safely locked away with Omar, so they were caught completely off guard when Phoenix came through the door with weapons in both hands. The entire facility was destroyed within minutes, cutting the Desert Shadows off from their network of cells throughout the region. The weapons cache required more finesse. Simply blowing it up would alert the entire compound, and Sarah still had work to do. Instead, she systematically disabled the firing mechanisms on dozens of rifles and rocket launchers, making them useless without appearing damaged. It would be weeks before anyone discovered the sabotage. By now, alarms were beginning to sound throughout the compound. Someone had discovered the unconscious guards outside Omar's quarters, and the entire organization was mobilizing to find the intruder. What they didn't realize was that the intruder had been living among them for months, learning their routines and weaknesses. Sarah made her way to the compound's motor pool, where she had identified the vehicle most likely to survive a high-speed escape through mountain roads. But first she had one more objective to complete. Hassan, the man who had originally recruited her, was the second in command of the entire operation. If Omar was captured or killed, Hassan would take over and rebuild the organization. That couldn't be allowed to happen. She found Hassan in the compound's command center, frantically trying to re-establish communications with the outside world. He looked up as she entered, and his face went through a series of emotions: confusion, recognition, and finally, terror. "Phoenix," he whispered. "Hello, Hassan," Sarah said calmly. "I wanted to thank you personally for inviting me here. It made my job so much easier." Hassan reached for his weapon, but Sarah was faster. The confrontation was brief and decisive. When it was over, the Desert Shadows had lost both their primary leader and their operational commander. The escape from the compound was exactly as challenging as Sarah had expected. Desert Shadow fighters poured out of buildings throughout the AA complex, firing at anything that moved. Sarah's vehicle took multiple hits as she raced through the valley, but the armor modifications she had secretly made to it during her months there held firm. The mountain roads became a gauntlet of roadblocks and ambushes, but Sarah had studied these routes extensively. She knew which paths would take her to safety, and which would lead to dead ends. More importantly, she knew that help was waiting. At exactly the coordinates she had transmitted earlier, an American helicopter waited in a small clearing. The pilot barely had time to register her approach before Sarah was diving through the open door, her escape vehicle exploding behind her as enemy rockets found their target. "Phoenix, this is Overwatch," came the voice through her headset as the helicopter climbed rapidly into safer airspace. "Mission status?" "Primary objectives completed," Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "Desert Shadow leadership eliminated. Communications network destroyed, planned attacks aborted. Recommend immediate action on the 2 bomber teams that didn't respond to the abort signal." "Understood. Intelligence teams are already moving on. Those targets. Excellent work, Phoenix." As the helicopter carried her toward the extraction point where she would begin her journey home, Sarah thought about the people she had left behind. The refugees she had treated as Dr. Martinez would have to find new medical care. The charity organizations would be investigated and probably shut down. The entire region would be destabilized as rival groups fought to fill the vacuum left by the Desert Shadow's destruction. But American lives had been saved. The planned attacks would not happen. The threat that had killed her squad mates and nearly killed her had been eliminated. 12 hours later, Sarah stood in General Stone's office at the secret facility where this had all begun. The debriefing had taken most of the night, but now came the conversation she had been dreading. "Phoenix is dead," General Stone said simply. Officially, she never existed. Dr. Sarah Martinez disappeared in a Desert Shadow compound that was destroyed by unknown attackers. Private Sarah Martinez died from complications related to her injuries 3 months ago. Sarah nodded. She had expected this. Deep cover operatives didn't get to retire with medals and pension plans. They simply disappeared, their sacrifices, known only to the people who had sent them into the darkness. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. General Stone smiled. "Now you get to decide who you want to be. We can provide you with a new identity, a new life anywhere in the world. You've more than earned it." Sarah thought about Jake Morrison back at the base, probably still making cruel jokes about soldiers who couldn't handle the pressure. She thought about Corporal Williams, who had tried to protect her when she seemed helpless. She thought about Lieutenant Johnson, who had genuinely cared about her recovery. "I want to go home," she said finally. "Back to the base. There are people there who need to know that sometimes the weakest-looking person in the room is actually the strongest." "General." Stone raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? Your cover story is that you died from your injuries." Sarah smiled, and for the first time in almost a year it was entirely genuine. "Then I guess I'm about to rise from the ashes." 3 days later, Sarah Martinez walked into the base cafeteria where this story had begun. She moved without crutches, her uniform crisp and her bearing confident. The shocked silence that greeted her arrival was everything she had hoped for. Jake Morrison dropped his fork, his face going pale as he stared at the woman he thought was either dead or permanently disabled. Around the cafeteria, other soldiers began to recognize her, their expressions ranging from amazement to confusion. Sarah walked directly to Jake's table and sat down across from him, just as he had done to her months earlier. "Hello, Morrison," she said pleasantly. "Miss me?" Jake's mouth opened and closed without sound. Finally, he managed to stammer, But you were... The accident, they said you... died?" Sarah supplied helpfully. "Well, that's the thing about phoenixes, Jake. We have a tendency to rise from the ashes when people least expect it." Around the cafeteria, word was spreading quickly. Sarah Martinez was back, but she was different somehow. Stronger, more confident, dangerous in a way that made even hardened soldiers step back respectfully. "I don't understand," Jake said weakly. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Let me explain something to you, Morrison. Sometimes the people you think are weakest are actually the ones you should fear most. Sometimes the soldier limping through the cafeteria is the same soldier who just eliminated an entire terrorist organization." Jake's eyes widened as the implication hit him. Around them, other soldiers were drawing the same conclusion. Sarah Martinez wasn't just back from the dead, she was back from something far more dangerous. "Phoenix," Jake whispered, and Sarah smiled. "Now you're catching on." As word of her return spread throughout the base, Sarah found herself surrounded by soldiers who looked at her with new respect and more than a little awe. The story of her apparent death and resurrection would become legend, but the full truth would remain classified for decades to come. Corporal Williams was among the first to approach her, his weathered face showing genuine relief and curiosity. "Good to have you back, Martinez," he said simply. "Or should I be calling you something else now?" Sarah considered the question. Phoenix was gone, her mission complete. Dr. Martinez had been a necessary fiction. What remained was the soldier she had always been, tempered by fire and strengthened by trials that would have broken lesser people. "Sarah's fine," she said. "Just Sarah. But as she looked around the cafeteria at faces that ranged from respectful to terrified, Sarah knew that she would never really be just Sarah again. She was a soldier who had walked through hell and emerged stronger. She was proof that sometimes the greatest victories come from the deepest defeats. And somewhere in the back of the cafeteria, Jake Morrison sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that the young soldier he had tormented was actually one of the most dangerous people he would ever meet. The phoenix had risen and the legend of Sarah Martinez was just beginning.